Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to SCSP's AI Plus Space Summit. Please take your seats and silence your phones. For our next session, titled Space and Energy, please welcome Marc Berte, co-founder and CEO of Overview Energy, for a fireside chat with Caleb Barnes, Associate Director at SCSP.
Hi, thank you all for joining us and for your attention right after lunch. We will do our best to make this entertaining for you all. So, I'm joined here by Marc Berte of Overview Energy. So, first off, for all of us here, would you like to explain what space solar energy is?
Sure. Space solar energy is collecting energy in space in a variety of different orbits and locations, either reflecting or converting it to another form of energy, sending it to the ground, and then utilizing it on Earth. And this encompasses a wide variety of different approaches, some of which have been looked at for decades and some of which are relatively new.
What are some problems that this solves?
I think the simplest one is the grid as we know it is broken. We're seeing that now, especially with AI being such a driver on energy needs, that where we generate energy and where we consume it, classically has always been relatively well linked. You have a city, you build a power plant. Now with increasing amounts of renewables, increasing types of energy sources, you're getting a geographic separation between generation and consumption. And that's driving massive issues in both infrastructure investment, build out, time delays on powering large-scale data centers, powering cities, et cetera. And space solar energy can solve that by separating the generation from the location, but providing a geographically untethered way of delivering it to a variety of different locations.
So what are some use cases for where space solar would be perfectly primed to fit in?
So I'll give you two examples. I'll give you a civilian example and a military example. A civilian example is we're already seeing AI development behind the meter. Meta's putting GPUs in tents next to a solar project because getting the interconnect is years and you can't wait for that. So that kind of thing can be solved because unlike a conventional solar project, if, for instance, Overview was providing photons to the solar project, we would be able to run that thing 24/7. So you don't need additional storage, you don't need to compensate for seasons or any of those kinds of aspects. So not only can you now create that solar project right away, and then perch a data center right there, but you don't have to do all these ancillary activities to it. So that's a civilian example. DoD example would be, let's say, for instance, Guam. Okay, Guam is extremely logistically constrained. It's one of the few places in the world that runs on diesel or JP8 in terms of their overall power infrastructure. And if you end up in an increasingly logistically constrained environment where you might have issues delivering a lot of fuel there, you want to use what fuel you have for the warfighter as opposed to just running the base infrastructure. So that's an example where you don't need it all the time, but when you need it, you definitely need it. And having resilient energy there would really be an advantage.
Is space solar something that would just be useful for terrestrial applications, or are there also orbital applications like a data center in space that it would be useful for?
So Overview in particular is space to ground. We focus on large-scale energy infrastructure, so utility scale, 100, 200 megawatts or bigger kind of solar projects, providing them energy 24/7. There's, in the space solar energy industry, which is nascent and rapidly developing, there's also space-to-space companies that are doing this, so powering additional satellites, that's an example for orbital data centers. There's also space to moon, ground to space, basically any way you can beam power or move the energy around, there's applications for this. So we work, one of the things I would say that the things that are making space solar energy workable now, low cost launch, large area, relatively cheap PV, being able to deploy things in space easily, that affects all of the different applications.
Yeah. So what is it that separates Overview Energy from its competition?
So, like I said, it's a burgeoning industry. So there's a few relatively well-funded private players in this industry. There's classically a lot of state-sponsored programs or some academic programs. The UK has a program, China has a program, Japan has a program, Caltech has a program. And what I think separates Overview was we started this from a pragmatic approach. In order to be successful, you have to minimize your overall capital requirements in order to get to first unit, so you can start then bootstrapping. You need to fall under existing regulatory and safety environments. So this is how do you not have to change policy and regulation to get there. You need to look at it from the economics of the situation. What are you actually trying to deliver? It isn't the most efficient system. It's the system that solves the energy problem with the right cost structure associated with it. So we take an approach, effectively wide beam, what we call wide beam near infrared from geo, that solves all of those particular problems.
So you said with regulation, a lot of forefront energy technologies need something to change, because they're dealing with regulatory structures that were built for something completely different. But you say this is something that can fit entirely with what you want to do without any significant changes?
Yeah, we believe so. A good analogy for your point would be, what really kicked fusion into high gear was being able to look at it in a different regulatory environment than fission. And making that separation, I think, is critical for the development of fusion power. I'm very bullish on fusion as well. So, but on the space solar energy side, one area for us was, okay, everyone's going to have safety concerns. Everyone's going to have orbital debris concerns. Everyone's going to have communication concerns, all these different things. So what you want is something where you can go to a regulator and say, okay, here is your existing policy on intensity of the beam to the ground. That we are absolutely within that. We're a factor of 10 under that. You can stand in it and stare at it, you're fine. Okay? And it's far easier to get the overall policy and everyone on board if you start at that point, as opposed to saying, well, we have to kind of do that. And that's not a good spot to be if you're trying to develop a new technology.
Yeah. Are there any potential safety or environmental issues with projecting a beam from space to Earth?
We've spent multiple years now ensuring that isn't the case. There's always an eye safety concern whenever you're sending anything. We're absolutely within those types of limits. This is safer than LiDARs on cars or lights on security cameras, effectively. We also had looked into how does this affect, we joke animal, mineral, vegetable, like what else out there could be affected by this, aircraft, spacecraft, et cetera. And we found that there's effectively no wildlife that can perceive the kinds of light that we're looking at transmitting. And that's a really critical aspect. You want to be able to also go in there and say, look, this isn't a problem for things. It doesn't create more problems than it's worth. Because no matter where you are, people are a lot more concerned about the impact of energy and its transportation it has on your backyard or the national park or all these different kinds of things. So the more you can make sure that that just simply is not the case is the right way to go about it.
Yeah. Well, if we speak loudly enough, we're close enough to the Capitol that legislators might hear us. What is the role of government that you would foresee happening with your technology?
I think, again, I'll use a fusion analogy. In the past, a lot of advanced energy has been governmental programs. So, ITER for fusion as an example. But if you look at the most advanced fusion work being done, Commonwealth, Helion, a variety of companies, they're all private. And what really needed to happen was for government to effectively say, okay, here's the environment you're working in, here's the regulations that you need to fit in, here's the policy associated with it, and we're going to be a customer. And I think that's really the critical piece that government can do is be the right customer for energy resilience, for advanced energy sources. Basically go in there and say, okay, here's our logistically constrained environment. Right now we'll pay blank per megawatt hour. If we're really concerned, we'll pay up to blank per megawatt hour, and here's our capacity reservation associated with that. Effectively, be the same kind of customer that hyperscalers and everyone else is in terms of the overall grid development. Because you can't do these things without a quasi long-term commitment. So, if Meta is going to say, okay, we're going to build a huge data center here. Okay, well, now, infrastructure needs to be put in place. That's going to take this amount of time and all those kinds of things. So if the government, whether it be civilian or military, said, okay, we have this energy need in this location, it's planned out to be this big, it'll occur at this time, this is what it needs, this is all those kinds of things, sell us the service. And that service model, I think, is really going to be the way government should interact with advanced energy sources.
So when it comes to the economics, what are the economics of space solar energy?
I think they can be extremely competitive, especially when you look at not just the cost instantaneous. I mean, you can pick a time, say, noon Pacific time, and look at wholesale energy prices in California, and they're going to be negative in the summer because we just have so much of an excess of solar, effectively. Well, those exact same places, 8 hours later, or in the winter, are going to have extremely high energy costs for the exact same reasons. So I think the economics for space solar are going to need to be looked at more than just regionally. So a satellite in geosynchronous orbit can see roughly a third of the planet at a time. So not only is this, Los Angeles in the summer, but it's at the exact same time, it's Santiago, Chile in the winter. It's Morocco at night. And once you put these all in perspective, the joke I like to say is it's always 5 o'clock somewhere, and rest in peace, Jimmy. But those peak energy prices are available at that time. So how do you look at the economics of selling into that market where the power is needed at that time and separating the generation from the consumption?
Yeah, separating generation from consumption. Really something novel that space would give us. Another thing that happens with forefront energy technologies, and we've certainly seen it with fusion, not to continue the same digression, is supply chains. So what does your supply chain look like? Are there any potential constraints, any things that you need to be built or be built here for this to work?
I mean, we're a U.S. company, and we're very, in a lot of ways, focused on the economics of where we can build it now. We're solar cell agnostic, effectively. So we'd like to use, on the satellite, the lowest cost, most available type of PD that's available. I think that there's some opportunities for the U.S. to onshore more solar cell production and be globally competitive in that fashion. I think there's, with automated production and a lot of things like that, I think we can recover a lot of that. Otherwise, our supply chain is very robust, and we kind of designed that from the beginning of what are the critical features, whether it be our transmitters or the various optics associated with that, where we build those and what materials we use. We very much take into account that we don't want to have any sort of bottleneck associated with that. The other thing that's really critical is this kind of geographically untethered piece is the receivers are everywhere. They're 200 megawatt or bigger utility scale solar farms. There's literally hundreds of those in the world, and more being developed every day. So one thing to look at from a supply chain perspective is, what does the customer's supply chain look like? If you have your solar project and your batteries associated with that, your supply chain is the sun, and you're only getting that 25% of the time on average across a year. So how do you solve that problem? But do so in a way that doesn't cause you an additional, supply chain issue. Yeah. So sorry for the roundabout answer on that.
Oh, okay. So with these systems being based in space, that seems somewhat difficult to repair. Can't just send out the cable guy to go get there. What do you do to ensure the resiliency of your systems?
I'm glad you pointed that out. Capital is always an issue, economics are an issue, safety is an issue, and the last one on that is resilience. What you don't want is a single source. We see that right now, where if you have a power plant. Now, the grid makes that reliable, even if that one power plant may go down or have a fault or anything like that. So what you ideally want is a cluster of satellites. And that's really what we provide is, it isn't one large satellite, it's a cluster of many in geosynchronous but not geostationary orbit, where each one is providing megawatt-like power levels to the ground in terms of delivered electricity. So that way, any one satellite could have damage associated with it, and you don't lose it. So it's like Starlink. If you lose a single Starlink satellite, the network doesn't go down. And then also you want to take into account the degradation of the system over time and minimize that. But again, you're looking at it as a network effect.
So why now for space solar? Why not 10 years ago? What's changed about the ecosystem that makes this a viability that these companies are springing up, that your company is springing up?
So, I mean, the first mention of space solar energy was, I think, in the 1930s. So it's been around that idea has been around for a long time. What's changed in the last 10 to 20 years, some things people have very much noticed. Launch costs going down by an order of magnitude and continuing to go down. Launch cadence going up by an order of magnitude and continuing to go up. So that's why we're here. But along the way, a lot of the critical technologies, efficiency of PV, overall mass of the PV, transmitter efficiency, et cetera, have all gone up. And effectively what us and others in space have done was say, wait a minute, all those things that made it not work in the past are now different. And I think most importantly, it's the market fit. Like there is such a demand for resilient, firm, where you want it energy right now, and that's only being exacerbated or improved by the AI boom in that now we need it and we need it now. And so the time has come both from a technological basis, but also from a product market fit basis.
Are there any other technologies that might come about as a result of advancements in space solar?
I think I would actually make it more general and say it's everything associated with space. Communications in the mega constellations have driven the space boom to where we have it now in terms of launch costs. Space solar energy is the infinite demand. It's no matter how many you could launch, you could always launch more. You could eventually move all of humankind's energy requirements into space. So if we're ever trying to drive that cost of access to space down to its asymptotic point, I think space solar energy is the flywheel for that, which means everything else you want to do in space, whether it be ballistic missile defense, whether it be over larger scale communication constellations, whether it be humans. All those things can be driven by a strong economic demand that reduces the cost of access. And I think space solar energy is really what's going to provide that.
When it comes to the extraterrestrial aims that we're hearing a fair amount about recently, is space solar a competitive or even a leading technology for potentially going to other planets, building a base back on the moon?
I think that, in this industry, there are companies focused on space to lunar power beaming for permanently shadowed craters and, cislunar operations and things of that nature. A lot of the technologies are common across the board. So what we're doing, focused on the space to Earth thing, some of the technologies, and we're looking to sell some of our technologies to others, and we have LOIs in place with companies to do so. So everything that you can do in space is going to be enabled by low-cost access, low-cost technologies, and more mature technologies that allow you to scale up. So I think we're one of the companies in an industry that is going to enable all of the other things.
All right, Mark, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm going to give you this last minute here to leave the audience with whatever you want to leave them with. What should they remember from this conversation?
Space solar energy is a thing. From us in particular, you're going to see a lot more public in the very near future, so kind of watch this space. We've been a little vague on a few things, but that's going to change in the near future. But overall, this is an industry, and this is complementary with the other things we're trying to do in space, whether it be data centers or large-scale other systems. So I think that now the time has come to look at this as one of the kind of 5 pillars of potential future energy. You have fission, fusion, terrestrial solar storage, all these different things combined. Now's the time to really look at this as one of the major options for it.
All right. Thank you so much. Please join me in giving a welcome hand to Marc Berte of Overview Energy.
For our next session, titled